You ever been on a project that just completely flew off the rails? Wildly over budget, way past its deadline? Of course you have. We all have. Well, it turns out that's not just bad luck. It's a predictable pattern, this hidden force called the planning fallacy, and it messes with everything, from giant city-spanning construction projects all the way down to your team's weekly sprint. So today, we're going to drag this thing out of the light and figure out how to fight back. Take a look at this number, 9 out of 10. According to years of research, that's how many huge infrastructure projects go over budget. Just let that sink in for a second. That means for pretty much every bridge, railway, or skyscraper we decide to build, the plan we start with is just wrong. This isn't some occasional screw-up, it's practically the default setting. And this quote from the economist Bent Flyvbjerg, who's basically the godfather of studying this stuff, he just lays it out bare. He says that cost overruns and delays aren't the surprise outcome. They are the norm. And that's the key, right there. This isn't random. It's a systemic, totally predictable problem that's baked right into the way we plan things.
All right, so how do we get our heads around this massive, predictable failure? And more importantly, what can we do about it? Here's our game plan. We're going to look at the mind-boggling costs of these mistakes. Then we'll dig into the psychological glitch that makes us plan this way. After that, we'll see how our own organizations crank up the volume on this bias. And finally, we'll explore a really powerful solution called the outside view.
Okay, first up, the billion-dollar mistake. Let's really get a feel for how expensive this little thinking error is, because we are not talking about small change here. We're talking about numbers that can literally shape national economies. I mean, just look at how consistent this is. Flyvbjerg's research shows that, on average, rail projects go over budget by a whopping 45%. Roads, they're over by 28%. Even just regular old building projects miss the mark by 20%. These aren't tiny miscalculations. This is a systemic failure to see reality. And to really bring this home, let's look at one of the most famous buildings on the planet, the Sydney Opera House. The original estimate was for $7 million and a 4-year build time. And the reality? It ended up costing $102 million. That's more than 14 times the budget, and it took 16 years to finish. It's a beautiful building, but it's also a perfect monument to our own runaway optimism. So why? Why does this keep happening over and over again? Well, that brings us to section 2, where we get to the root cause, a fundamental flaw in the way our brains are wired, a real glitch in how we focus. It's something called the inside view. And here's how it works. When we sit down to plan something, our natural instinct is to zoom in on all the unique, special details of our project. We think about our great team, our brilliant plan, and we basically write a story in our heads about how everything is going to go perfectly. But you know what we don't do? We don't look at the cold, hard data of how 1,000 other similar projects actually went. We just completely ignore history. But wait, it gets worse. That little individual bias, that human quirk, well, it gets put on steroids the second you walk into an organization. The optimistic inside view gets supercharged by the very systems and structures we work in. There are these 3 huge forces at work. First, something Flyvbjerg calls strategic misrepresentation. Basically, to get your project approved, you're competing for money and resources. And guess what? The most optimistic plan, the one that looks cheapest and fastest, is the one that usually wins. It's an incentive to lie, basically. Second, you've got group reinforcement. You know how it is. In a meeting, nobody wants to be that negative person who raises concerns. It's so much easier to just nod along and keep the good vibes going. And finally, there are cascading delays. Planners almost always forget that on a complex project, one tiny delay doesn't stay tiny. It kicks off a domino effect, a chain reaction of delays that spreads through the whole system.
So if our brains are wired for this and our companies just make it worse, are we just doomed to keep failing? Well, not necessarily. There is an antidote, and it's a really radical but also surprisingly simple shift in perspective called the outside view.
And this slide, right here, this is the absolute heart of it all. The flawed inside view asks a very specific question. How long will this project take based on our special, unique plan? It's a story, right? A story we tell ourselves. But the outside view asks a totally different and much more powerful question. Hey, when other people just like us try to do something just like this, how long did it actually take them? It forces you to ignore your own story and look at the statistics. Now, there's a formal name for doing this. It's called reference class forecasting. It sounds complicated, but it's not. All you do is find a whole bunch of similar past projects, that's your reference class, and you look at their real-world outcomes. How much did they actually cost? How long did they actually take? And you use that data as the anchor for your own estimate, not your own hopeful best-case scenario plan. You're grounding your plan in what has really happened, not just what you wish would happen.
So if this solution is so simple, why isn't everybody doing it? Well, because it requires something that's really, really hard for us to do. It requires a painful admission. It forces us to accept that, you know what? Our project probably isn't that special. Our team probably isn't magically more competent than the hundreds of other teams who've tried this before. And that beautiful, optimistic plan we poured our hearts into, it's probably wrong. That's a tough pill to swallow, especially since most organizations are built on this idea that they are exceptional.
And that brings us to our final and most important point. The fight against the planning fallacy, it's really a battle between two very powerful forces, the power of hope and the power of history.
So if there's one big idea to take away from all this, it's this concept of an institutional optimism bias. The planning fallacy isn't just a simple thinking mistake that we make as individuals. No, it is a bug that's baked into the system. It's structurally reinforced by the need to compete for projects, by the social pressure to agree, and by the sheer, tangled complexity of the work we're trying to do. Our organizations are, by their very design, optimism machines.
And so that leaves us with a direct challenge. For every single project you work on from this day forward, whether it's a multi-billion-dollar venture or just prepping a presentation for next week, I want you to take a hard look at your plan. Look at your budget, look at your timeline, and ask yourself one simple but brutally honest question. Is this plan built on hope or is it grounded in history?